What's up, Star Wars nerds, and welcome to another episode of Brett on Fett. On today's episode, I'll be giving my complete review of the all-new Mandalorian Glavis Ringworld figure for the Black Series. Let's get to it. Welcome back to the channel. This is episode 84 of Brett on Fett, and it is the very first video of 2024. Now, we finished off 2023 with a ton of vintage collection videos. We got a lot of stuff in the final quarter of 2023 where you basically had the last two waves kind of come in back to back.
What are all those boxes?
It's just stuff I'm selling.
And it was a lot of great stuff. And although TVC is my main focus of collecting, I do still pick up Black Series figures every now and then. And so I thought this would be a good time to do another Black Series video with TVC kind of dying down for the moment with their releases. And I've been wanting to talk about this all-new Mandalorian figure for the Black Series. It's the Glavis Ringworld version. Now, since 2019, Hasbro has been putting out a ton of Mandalorian figures using that same original mold. Now, let me see if I can list off all the different versions of that Mando we've gotten over the years. Of course, in 2019, we started off with the first edition Mando, and that's Mando in his early look without the Beskar. And then they repacked that same figure with the mainline release of that early Mando. And then that was followed up by a carbonized version of the Mandalorian. Then we got the Beskar version of the Mandalorian mainline release. And then there was an exclusive, I think it was a Target exclusive, maybe Walmart exclusive 2-pack of the Beskar Mando with Grogu. That was essentially a repack of that same Beskar Mando figure. And then we got a repaint of that set with the muddy version of Mando, which I believe was Mandalorian Arvala 7. And then we got a Maldo Kreese repaint of that Mando where he had the snowy look to him. And then we got that 2-pack, or I guess you could call it a 3-pack, with Mando and Ahsoka with Grogu, where Mando had that Beskar spear and I think a little bit of repainting going on as well. And then sometime in between those releases, we've got 3 separate credit collection releases of Mando. You got Mando in his early look without the Beskar. You got Mando with the Beskar. And then you got a Mando from Tatooine, I believe from the scene where he's fighting the Crate Dragon. And so that is a ton of releases for one particular figure mold that is frankly outdated. And so finally, Hasbro has put out an all-new figure for the Mandalorian. And I've been wanting to see if that version is actually worth buying, especially for those collectors who already have one or more of the previous version. Now, Hasbro's actually come out with 2 versions of this new Mando. One is the Glavis Ringworld release, which I will be reviewing on this video, but they're also putting out a Mines of Mandalore release for the Mandalorian. And as far as I can tell from all the images I've seen, that Mines of Mandalore figure is the exact same figure as Glavis Ringworld, minus the jetpack. And so I don't understand why anyone would want to buy that version unless you are a inbox collector for Black Series and a completionist. But if I'm wrong about that, if anyone out there knows if there is another difference between these figures besides the lack of jetpack, let me know in the comments. But anyways, let's go ahead and take a look at my review of the Glavis Ringworld release of the new Mandalorian figure. Alright, so let's go ahead and start off by taking a look at the packaging. This is a standard Phase 4 or Galaxy packaging that we've had for a while. And as you can see, this figure is from the Book of Bobafett series, from that episode that Mando basically took over Boba Fett's show. And there's an awesome mural of Mando holding the darksaber. There's a description on the back if you want to pause and read that later. But yeah, pretty standard packaging. Just notable that it is from the Book of Boba Fett and not from the Mandalorian. Next up, let's take a look at what all is included in the package. You've got Mando and then 4 accessories, beginning with this knife. I guess it's a vibro blade. Some nice little subtle details on that thing. Really cool to get a knife with Mando. And I love this blaster pistol. Check out the wood grain effects on the stock handle. I don't recall seeing another figure that has that, so that's pretty sweet. And then here is the darksaber, looking pretty good, although it doesn't have the little patterns on it that we got out of the TVC pre-Vizsla. This is basically the same darksaber that came with the Black Series version of pre-Vizsla. And then finally his jetpack, which looks very nice. Got a really nice metallic paint on there. Huge improvement over the previous version, which we'll take a look at a little bit later. So there's your accessories. And now let's take a good look at the figure's appearance overall. And as you can see, the metallic paint looks very good. I like the sigil on his pauldron there. I'm seeing some nice detailing overall. I like the pronounced triangular emblem painted on his little hand armor there, for lack of a better term. But the details on his legs, his boots, all seem really nice. Like they really put an effort into making this work all the way around his boots. There's his bandolier, which looks really good. That little padding area behind his neck, that's actually like a softer kind of rubbery plastic. So I like that that's a little bit different than, it's not just blended in with the armor on his back. So that's nice. And I just want to check out the helmet again. Yeah, it just looks really good. A very metallic look to it. And as you can see under there is no head sculpt on this figure. The helmet does not come off. And taking a look at his backplate again, I noticed there's this extra hole there. You see his jetpack only has 3 prongs, so I don't know what that 4th hole is with, it's like a vertical rectangle. If you guys know in the comments, let me know. I couldn't figure it out. And there's a nice little hook here on the back of his belt to hang his darksaber from, which by the way, the blade does come off. I forgot to mention that earlier, but it's got the little loop on there so you can hang it from his belt. So that's a nice little feature there. And down on his right boot, this might be a little bit hard to see on camera, but he does have a little slot there for the vibro blade. So that's where the vibro blade goes, and it fits in there nice and securely. And although the hilt sticks slightly above the joint, it doesn't seem to hinder any articulation there with the knife in his boot. And one last thing I almost forgot to mention that kind of bothers me is the paint color on his fingertips. Those are supposed to be his exposed fingers, and last I checked, Mando is not that dark. I mean, this looks like he has been tanning on Tatooine for ages. So I don't know what they were thinking going with that color of paint, and it is the first negative thing I've noticed. Alright, so other than the fingertips looking good so far, so let's put on his accessories to see how he looks with those. And here he is with his darksaber, looking pretty awesome. And I've attached the jetpack, and I haven't really talked about his cape, but probably the best improvement so far is the cloth goods cape, because you can now put on his jetpack and tuck it under there like so, and it looks really good. And by the way, the jetpack fits very secure, not loose at all. And let's take a look at the holster with his blaster pistol in there. So you can see that goes really well. We've already seen the vibro blade, how it fits in his boot. He is able to hold the darksaber very well, and I'm looking forward to getting him into some poses with that thing. But yeah, looking great with all the accessories attached. All right, so now let's run through the articulation. I'm going to take all the accessories off to make that a little bit easier. His head is on a ball swivel there, so plenty range of motion. And his arm is able to raise above his shoulders, and it helps a lot that they've got the pauldron attached with that little piece of rubber above the arm. The elbows have a ball hinge that allow it to bend more than 90 degrees, so that's excellent. And it can swivel as well, of course. The wrists swivel and have what I call a horizontal hinge that allows the hand to bend to the inside. But on the other hand, you've got the what I call a vertical hinge, so the hand can bend up and down. So that's great. I like to see the combination there, which is great for posing with different kinds of weapons. Now, when it comes to the crunch at the torso, unfortunately, he is not able to swivel much at all. It is very confining there, and I don't know if that has to do with all the accessories attached to him or what, but he also does not bend very far back and forth with that crunch. So very limited, probably because of the armor, but that is unfortunate. Moving on to the legs, he does have the barbell hips, which is pretty standard. He's got a nice swivel joint there at the upper thigh. He's got a ball hinge there at the knees, which does give his leg a 90-degree bend, and of course it can swivel as well. And then he's got the ball hinge at the ankle, which is a rocker ankle. So great articulation in the legs. So overall, the articulation is as you would expect with an all new figure. except for maybe with that crunch joint being a little too restrictive. Alright, so now that we've gotten a good feel for the new Mando figure, let's bring in the old Mando figure and bring in some of the accessories that came with this one. Let's take a look at the obvious appearance differences between the two figures first. Now, it may not come through on the camera, but on the new Mando, the paint is a much better metallic look in my opinion. And take a look at the sigil on his pauldron, it's much larger and more pronounced, so that looks way better. And just the overall detailing on the new Mando just stands out a little bit better. And nice little details like the ammo rounds on his boot go almost all the way around versus the old one, they were just in the front. And just the detailing and colors used on the boots look way better to me as well. Taking a look at the holsters, you'll see on the old Mando it did have this nice little strap to hold the pistol in. That was a nice little feature, but the paint color on the new Mando is much more screen accurate with that traditional dark brown leather appearance. And of course the same can be said for the belt and bandolier. Now flipping over to the back, you see a huge difference between the figures. The old Mando had of course that molded plastic cape, which that works in some applications, but in the case of Mandalorian, you've got a jetpack there and you just cannot put the jetpack on with the cape on as well. So you have to take the cape off of the old Mando figure in order to put the jetpack on. So huge disadvantage for the old Mando with that plastic cape. Now let's go ahead and compare some of the accessories. Here is the jetpack. You can see the old jetpack just had this kind of dull gray. I don't even know if they painted that. I think that's just the gray colored plastic, versus the new one has that metallic finish on it, which looks so much better. And of course the old Mandalorian came with this awesome pulse rifle. This is a very nice gun. And of course the new one has the darksaber. So you can't really compare the two completely different weapons, and actually I think it's really great to have both. And then comparing the blaster pistols, I think there is no contest. The new Mando blaster looks way better with that gunmetal gray colors, and then of course that wood grain effect on the stock looks so good. So in my opinion, this is hands down the better pistol with the new Mando figure. And then lastly, the new Mando of course comes with this awesome vibro blade, whereas the old Mando came with no blade at all. So next let's take a look at the articulation differences between the two figures. This was really sad. That is as high as the arm would go on the old Mando. He could not even raise it to his shoulder. So that was a big problem with that old figure. Whereas on the new Mando, because you've got that new pauldron design, he can raise his arm above his shoulder. So check out the difference there. That makes a world of difference when it comes to posing action figures. Next, let's take a look at the elbow articulation on the old Mando. Not terrible, but definitely not great. He just barely gets 90 degrees, whereas we check out the new Mando, he gets more than 90 degrees. So big win on the new Mando for elbow articulation. Now for the head articulation, I can barely get the old Mando figure to look up at all, just barely. It makes his helmet start to come off actually. But on new Mando, the neck articulation is much better, and so you can get him to look pretty far up, at least as far up as you probably would need him to. Next, let's take a look at the leg articulation, and on the old Mando, you actually could not swivel his lower leg at all. And it does have a thigh cut there to swivel, but that thigh swivel joint is very tight. I always found it very difficult to articulate the legs on this old Mando. So it is not good. Whereas on the new one, as we saw earlier, plenty of articulation and no problem at all getting those joints to do what they're supposed to do. So when it comes to the articulation, it's hands down no competition. The new Mando is far superior, as it should be, being a brand new figure. Now I have to mention, perhaps one advantage the old Mando has is that it did have a head sculpt for Pedro Pascal, and it wasn't great, but it's not the worst thing ever. He's a little bit frumpy looking, but at least you have that ability to take his helmet off, whereas of course on the new Mando, there is no face sculpt. Now maybe Hasbro's justification for doing that is that these new figures are based on Book of Boba Fett and the Season 3 appearance of Mando, and he never takes his helmet off in those, but most likely this was simply a cost savings decision. So all in all, the Mandalorian Glavis Ringworld version is a far superior Mandalorian figure to what we've gotten in the past, with the cloth goods cape, the improved detailing, and the updated articulation. I think this makes it well worth the purchase, even if you do have one or more of the previous Mandos. In fact, I like that I have the pulse rifle from the previous version. I think that's a great accessory to have to go along with this new Mando. So if you're a Mandalorian fan and you collect the Black Series, I think you should definitely buy this figure, regardless if you have the previous versions or not. So let's get him in some poses on the spinny spinny to close this thing out. Alright, so that's going to do it for this episode of Brett on Fett. Let me know in the comments if you plan on buying the new Glavis Ringworld version of the Mandalorian, and if you have bought him, what you think about him. Thanks so much for checking out this video. Thank you to my subscribers. Don't forget you can also follow me on Instagram and on X. Take care, and we'll see you next time.